You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite and president of Venable Park Investment Council Incorporated. Welcome to the show, Danielle.
Hey, Jim.
We've seen a dismal forecast for the Canadian economy from the Bank of Canada. Have they really told us about the real shape of the economy going into the election? And what's more, I don't hear candidates talking about it.
It's interesting, isn't it? There was a press sort of staged event today with Obama and the head of Italy declaring that the financial crisis is all behind us. And, you know, we were just discussing that in our office because it seems that they truly believe, the politicians are so used to seeing themselves as the cheerleading crowd, you know, that they can inspire confidence and that in itself will kick off a virtuous cycle of expansion and recovery, that they seem to really believe this stuff. So, you know, looking past the $35 trillion of additional debt that's been added in the world over the past 5 years, the, you know, horrendous math that faces most pensions and countries and individuals, they're just hoping that if they cheerlead loud enough, then no one will, you know, that we don't have to face the math, that somehow they'll overcome it through just jawboning and confidence. And, you know, I think at some point there's a certain place for that kind of leadership or inciting of animal spirits. And, you know, perhaps when you've been in an extended downturn and people are despairingly gloomy, you know, I remember being in the spring of 2009, you know, saying to people literally, you know, I think that's probably enough. I think we've probably seen the worst of it. And people looking at you like, you're crazy. You've got to be crazy. Don't you know the world's going to end? And I think at those points, you know, any objective facts or encouragement that you can offer so that people, you know, stop feeling like it's literally the end of the world and start looking for what's possibly going right, that can be an important catalyst or start at least. But when you're at the top of a expansionary credit cycle, when everybody's up to the eyebrows, when the math is just eroding the spending power of the world, you know, just trying to pretend and extend and you know, sort of rally the troops is really having no effect whatsoever. And I think it not only does it not have a stimulative effect, but it actually undermines any fragile credibility that these figureheads had in the first place, because people are looking at the actual, you know, predicament that they're in, or that the people around them are in, and saying, you know, you can't just tell us it's all going to be good and we just have to go spend more. We don't have any more money and we can't access more credit. So, you know, how is this going to work? So I think that's where we're at today, and you know, every so often something truthful slips out of a policymaker, like when the Bank of Canada had said that, you know, that the downturn in oil would be atrocious for Canada. And then they'll backpedal, you know, a few days later, usually when they get a call or a memo from someone saying, you know, ease up on the negative rhetoric. I think they're encouraged to try and be optimistic. It's really the nature of the beast, is, you know, to be optimistic. So, you know, I'm all for optimism, but I think misplaced or naive optimism can be very destructive.
I know all these promised tax cuts by the federal government going into the federal election is going to cost us a lot. Can Canada afford those tax cuts?
Well, unless we want to do some pretty significant deficit spending, the answer would be no, right? The math is what it is. They were forecasting surplus, and they're now looking at a deficit. And unless, you know, the only possible argument that the deficits won't be worse than people are currently thinking is that they think prices will rally quickly again. They're looking for a V-shaped recovery in the energy sector, much like they saw in 2009 off the great financial crisis low. And I just don't think that's in the cards this time. I think there's far too many factors like, you know, increasing supply that's still mounting everywhere. the advent of alternative energies, which are taking a chunk out of the demand that was traditionally there for fossil fuels, as well as the aging demographics, as well as the indebtedness of the populations in general, are all weighing on the ability to, ratchet up demand and consumption of petrol products. And so I just think that they're looking at historic cycles and thinking, well, this one will bounce back quickly, and I just don't think that they're appreciating how many things are fundamentally different this particular cycle.
And even when it comes to buying autos, younger adults are not impressed now by performance. In the Vancouver area especially, they like car co-ops, where you don't have to have a full-time vehicle. There's a lot of thought that the car business may be fading out as well.
Well, I think, again, it goes back to the mother of invention, right, being necessity. And I think that when people come to the end of their credit lines, when they find that they are strapped, when they find that they're already servicing a lot of debt and they're not getting wage growth or great job prospects, they naturally pull in. I think it's, the Generation X that are coming after the boomers, the children of the boomers, are much more frugal in many ways. I think they're looking at the asset bubbles everywhere and saying, I can't possibly afford that, so I don't want to even aspire to have my own house or perhaps have my own car, especially when I can live, happier with less overhead by sharing a car or by sharing accommodation. I think that they're a lot more pragmatic. I also saw some data that they're trying to save significantly more. The baby boomers have been notoriously bad savers for a whole bunch of reasons, and that has continued into their, now leading into the 60s. And so they have these saving deficits, and I think that the people coming after them that have sort of watched that and see that that's not a great model. So plus with the baby boomers, drawing down the system benefits-wise and becoming takers from the tax pool over the next 15 to 20 years as they move into their 80s, then, there's just going to be less cash flow available for everything else. And I think younger people are starting to sort of get that and appreciate that they're going to have to be more careful and frugal with what they're buying. The good news, though, and someone sent me a chapter of a book that was just reminding of this, and I think it's important. This is not a perpetually negative story, right? This is a factor of baby boomers that are aging by the day, and not that anyone wants to sit around and wait for people to die. It's not that, but the reality is they won't be a draw on the system indefinitely. That the leading edge being 66. As I say, in another 15 years, they're going to be into their 80s and reaching their natural life expectancy. So, it's a period here where we should have prepared better and we didn't. We're going to pay the price probably over the next few years for the deficits and for the increased benefits that are being taken from the system. But at some point, it's going to be like someone taking their foot off of a bent tree. When the weight of that entitlement program starts to wane, I think we're going to have a big jump back we're going to have more free cash flow and much less burden on the system, and there will be capital available for other things. It's the getting from here to there that we have to worry about right now.
We'll have more with Danielle Park right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite. Truthfulness in reporting. You've pointed out that a lot of these people you see on the financial channels maybe aren't being as honest with you as they should be about what they're telling you and what they believe.
Well, it's just that this line between, ethics and objective reporting has been blurred over the past 20 years, increasingly with the advent of the business-focused channels, which are paid for by their deep-pocketed sponsors. And so these people continue to pose as journalists when in fact they're not journalists. Or if they were trained as journalists, they're no longer adhering to the professional code of journalism, and they're now, doing all sorts of lucrative speaking gigs and promotions and, from the people who are sponsoring the shows. So there's a lot of financial conflicts that are going on behind the scenes. And, what the CBC in Canada recently got into trouble because, as did, I put an article, I think it was back in February, for the UK's Guardian. We talked about it, I think, back then, did a report on, how the sponsors are controlling the message when it comes to journalism and major publications, whether it be print or to television. So there was a big kerfuffle in Canada with respect to Amanda Lang, the CBC anchor, who was, trying to talk down a story that a fellow journalist had brought out about the RBC and some questionable policies they were doing, and she was doing that while not disclosing that she'd also done several speaking engagements, paid for speaking engagement by RBC, and that her, partner in life was in fact a member of RBC's board of directors. So there's an example where, the CBC as a public broadcaster is surely held to a different standard, or ought to be, than the, business focused sponsored media shows which have come up over the past 20 years. Even the BNNs of the world are very clearly not, public journalist facilities. They're very much, paid for by the sponsor, advertising essentially. And those, you have to make some kind of a distinction. Well, I think you do, because in the tradition of the BBC, these public broadcasters were brought up with the idea that, democracies need people to have a forum where they can speak about important issues that may not even be pro-government, that may challenge some of the existing ideas or stand up to the status quo. And that's been always considered a very important tenet of democracy. And so in the last number of years, the pressure has become, as conservative governments have cut back, both in the UK and in Canada, cut back from public funding towards these institutions, they've become increasingly reliant on business sponsorship and trying to get, the CBC famously attracted Kevin O'Leary in the past few years to, get business eyeballs interested in the CBC. And it was a slippery slope. It was a sellout in many ways because, of course, Kevin was the furthest thing from a journalist or an anchor. He was a very self-promoting fund manager, slash Dragon's Den / any show that he could get himself on to promote his business and objectives. And so he's recently left and gone back to CTV because he said, no, I can get more eyeballs there than I can at CBC. So anyway, there's been a tarnishing of the reputation of what was previously considered a very distinguished journalism franchise, and I just bring that to the attention of everyone because it's the same principle that we've seen queered when it comes to the advising versus the selling arm in big financial institutions, when it comes to the academics writing papers that were bought from the financial sector, wanting the academics to bootstrap up what's in the best interest of the financial firms. And, the central banks, Ben Bernanke doing his victory lap, taking a gig this week with Citadel, a major hedge fund, actually an HFT fund, one of the biggest in the world, and he's taken a paid job as a consultant for Citadel. So when you see that, you realize that no wonder we haven't had any meaningful curtailment or regulation on HFT, even though it's clearly not in the public's best interest to have that going on in public markets. But when the actual figureheads that were, in charge of oversight and regulation, such as the head of the central bank, leaves public office and goes straight to a paid gig at those firms, it really calls into question the integrity of the entire operation. And I would suggest that that's why we're in the pickle we are today, because we have this revolving door, whether it's in government regulation and big finance, whether it's in, quote, journalism and media and big finance, or whether it's in academia. And all of it takes us toward greater risk, greater debt, and greater financial instability, which is what we're paying the price for right now.
And how long in advance did Bernanke know that he was going to be getting this major job? That could have influenced his policy for years, knowing that was online, perhaps. Well,
clearly that was always his goal, because there's no formal policy in place, and I would suggest that there needs to be. Even in private corporations, there's typically non-compete periods, so there should be at least a period after leaving public office where you're not allowed to go work for the competition, so to speak, go to work for the parties that were, that you were supposedly regulating beforehand. And we've seen this repeatedly, and it's really, truly revolting. And people have watered down their sense of standards so much in the past few years that, even the people who really ought to know better are sort of saying, well, so-and-so does it, or, how dare you question my integrity? Just because I'm taking money from them doesn't mean that I've been, that my opinions or my views have been shaped in any way. It's like, first of all, baloney. That's very unlikely that your opinions and views weren't shaped. And second of all, it's about appearance of bias. And the whole judicial system knows about that. The whole principles of law are, it may or may not be shaping your opinions and views and statements, but we don't want to have conflicts of interest because it gives the appearance of bias, and that's not something that fairness, transparency, democracy, all those things values or needs in order to function. So it's going back to basic principles. Basically, the inmates have been running the asylum. We have to put these lines back on the road. We have to divide up, the sales side from the professional side. It's the same with drug companies and doctors. We can't have the drug companies driving the information or the advising that the doctors are giving, or the whole system breaks down. So it's very rudimentary. It's so obvious, and it's what we've had traditionally in place, but in the past, quote, modern times, they've really blurred all these lines and thrown the lions in with the Christians, so to speak.
Well, it seems to me the movie Wall Street celebrated the fact that people are willing to do anything to make a quick buck, and they don't care who they hurt.
Well, we know that about human nature to varying degrees. People can be swayed, and, people that maybe would normally be quite principled can be swayed by even individual challenge or strife in their own personal life, can shape, they wouldn't have done something in normal conditions, but under stress they'll do something. So, and we're never going to catch everyone who wants to do criminal behavior, but what I'm talking about is as an officially sanctioned madness that's gone on, where all these levels of sort of floodgates or controls or, counterbalance checks that were supposed to be in place, ethical principles that ward off against certain kind of risks coming into the average person, the division between risk selling and risk managing, so that you have someone monitoring that's not being paid to take on more of the risk, someone actually monitoring and balancing and making sure things don't get out of whack. We need to have those things within our society at all different levels. Otherwise, special interests will always find a way, whether they be left or right, it's irrelevant. The point is, to have a strong, robust system, you need opposing forces. And those forces can't be commingled at every turn, or the whole thing breaks down.
Danielle, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Have a good weekend.
You too. My guest has been Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite and president of Venable Park Investment Council Incorporated. Her website is jugglingdynamite.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.